Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt, joined by Matt Continetti. Matt, of course, is the Director of Domestic Policy Studies at American Enterprise Institute. He's a contributor to Commentary Magazine, a daily, almost daily participant in the Commentary podcast, which is knocking on 19,000 subscribers over at YouTube. We encourage you to like and subscribe the Commentary podcast. And for the Free Press, he's a columnist. Matt, a good Friday to you. Ever since you set your goal of 10,000, you've just blown past milestone after milestone. So what's the limit for the Commentary Magazine podcast?
There's no limit. I'm going to be like Elon Musk and shoot for Mars. So we're going to hit 20,000 YouTube subscribers by Labor Day, Hugh, and then we're going to seek to double that in the coming year. So the commentary grows and grows.
I learned from Comfortably Smug on Ruthless that you get a plaque from Google when you go to 100,000. So that's my end game. I want the plaque. Matt, on Sunday, we will have the 6-month anniversary for the second time of a Donald Trump term. And I've been listening to you pretty closely as you're trying to inject into the Commentary podcast notice of achievement. And I want to run down my list and then run down with you. In the first 6 months of his second term, this is just what I think is important. The Iranian nuclear program was destroyed and the threat of proliferation to a theocracy was shattered. Israel was restored to the status of the equal of any of our allies on the planet. NATO countries committed to a 5% defense budget. The border is closed. Tax cuts were extended and expanded. The key rates were made permanent. The defense rebuild is underway. The first year is funded. Inflation is calmed. DEI and CRT are exiled. Title IX is protected. Elite higher education has been served notice. It must comply with the Constitution and civil rights law. NPR and PBS are defunded. USAID is defunded. The U.S. Steel deal happened. The AI and energy investment in Pennsylvania, model for every state, happened. And we've got commitments of hundreds of billions of dollars in the United States. A reader sent me a note. You have to include the Pakistan-India de-escalation and the treaty between the DRC and Rwanda. I'm not so sure about those two because they could change tomorrow. Meanwhile, the Democrats in these 6 months have taken up profanity as a practice and have embraced Comrade Mamdani in New York as the future of their party. What do you think of his first 6 months in that list?
I think they've been incredibly successful, Hugh. I think we look at Trump's achievements in this time period through the lens of what he promised on the campaign trail and what voters who supported him wanted, according to the exit polls. And when you look at what voters said were their priorities in the 2024 election, bringing radical change to Washington, reviving the American economy, and dealing with the migration crisis that ensued from a 4-year open border under Joe Biden. Trump has made great gains in all three of these dimensions of policy. Change has come to Washington. There's no doubt to that. Your list speaks to all of the change. The border is closed. There were 0 entries in the last month. That's the second month in a row, I believe, with 0 entries. And the deportations are beginning. And in fact, they're having such an impact already that some people are getting wary of them. That's actually a sign of success for Trump. And then there's the economy. And despite all of the warnings, all of the predictions of doom from the establishment economists, the liberal establishment economists, Trump has been waging his trade war, and inflation has remained stable. It has fallen, actually. Now it's somewhat stable. It came in within expectations in the past month. And we have records in the stock market. We have a full employment economy, close to full employment, and gas prices and egg prices have fallen. So if you just look at what voters wanted Trump to accomplish, he's already accomplished it. And then you add to that the foreign policy victories. You add to that the tax bill, which not only prevented a massive tax increase, but also incorporated Trump's populist tax ideas from the campaign trail, most famously no tax on tips. And you have just a remarkable run for President Trump midway through his first year of his second term.
When I come back with Matt during the break, we're going to break down some of these. He did not put an order on that. Matt, before we go to break, do you have a number one accomplishment?
The border, without a doubt.
Oh, interesting. I thought it was blowing up Iran's nuclear program. And we'll talk about that during the break. Don't go anywhere, America. I'm going to talk to Matt during the break. He'll be back on the other side. We do this every Friday in a week in review. And I promise you, we will eventually mention Joseph, not Joseph. What was Epstein's first name? I can't remember.
Jeffrey.
Sleazebag? Jeffrey Epstein. We will mention Jeffrey Epstein, sleazebag, and criminal when we come back as well. Don't go anywhere. I'm Hugh Hewitt. I am back with Matt Continetti during the break. Matt, I agree with you that the border being closed is probably the most important political thing that Donald Trump did because they're going to wave the, quote, bloody flag about the open border, they being Republican nominees. Do you want to go back to that? For as many years as I've got left on this planet, we'll be talking about Joe Biden's open border versus Donald Trump's closed border. But I think, and I'm always leery, history will say, I have no idea what history will say, but I'm guessing history is going to focus on the demolition of the Iranian nuclear regime if it stays demolished. How significant is that if it stays demolished?
If it stays demolished, it's extremely significant. Look, I think that the Operation Midnight Hammer, the destruction of the Iranian nuclear program in coordination with Israel, was a huge accomplishment of the first 6 months. It was an operational achievement simply to plan the attack, to come up with the technology of the bunker busting bombs, to do it under total stealth cover with the media chasing B-2s headed toward the Pacific when in fact they were flying over the Atlantic. This is an incredible achievement. It's definitely set back the Iranian nuclear program. And most important, Israel and the United States have overmatched in the skies of Iran. And so if something happens, if the Iranians try to rebuild, if they try to move some of the material from the other sites, not Fordow, the underground sites, but the other sites, then Israel or the United States can always strike again. The underlying problem, of course, is that the Iranian regime remains in place. And so it's all the more important that we keep up the pressure, that we continue to exert maximum pressure economically on the Iranians, on the mullahs, and that we also maintain a posture of peace through strength to constrain them from rebuilding the program. That, Hugh, made a change in American foreign policy. We're now at the point where we're not going to allow our enemies to achieve nuclear weapons. We're not going to play this diplomatic shell game that allowed a country like North Korea to basically walk right into being a nuclear power under the cover of diplomacy. Trump stopped that. He did what presidents prior to him only promised to do. And for that act, he deserves a great plaudits, and I think will be recognized in the history books.
You know, it's an interesting thing. I had a friend who was involved in the North Korean negotiations back in '94. He always reminds me North Korea would have responded to a strike on their facilities by leveling Seoul. And I think it's a fair point. Iran did not invest in any kind of counterstrike. They had no counterstrike, right? They couldn't do anything.
Well, this is a key point, Hugh, because our Operation Midnight Hammer came at toward the end of the 12-day war. And remember when Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, many people, including me, were saying, well, it doesn't seem like they're actually hitting the nuclear sites all that much. What were they doing? Well, they were going after command and control. They were going after the missile launchers. They were taking out the means Iran had to retaliate. And the longer that operation took place, the more the Iranian retaliatory capacity was destroyed. In the North Korean case, you're right.
Pause for a second. Let's come back to North Korea as soon as we come back on the national network. Welcome back, America. I'm Hugh Hewitt. Matt Continetti remains with me. During the break, we were talking about the marvel of Operation Midnight Hammer, and Matt was just noticing that Operation Rising Lion, which went before it for 11 days, took out the ability of Iran to do anything to its neighbors, which is why the Clinton team say they couldn't obstruct the North Korea facilities in 1994 because North Korea, run by a despot, would have leveled Seoul and killed millions of people. Matt, you were about to say something about North Korea.
Well, what I would say is that in a North Korean scenario, you might have to consider taking out the conventional artillery that threatens Seoul in addition to the nuclear site. Of course, this is a hypothetical, but I will say this. With Operation Midnight Hammer, Trump essentially endorsed the Begin Doctrine, named after the former Israeli prime minister, who said that Israel would never allow one of its enemies to obtain a nuclear weapon and pose an existential threat to the Jewish state. And that's why Israel took out the nuclear plant at Osirak in Iraq in the 1980s. It's why it took out the Syrian nuclear plant in 2007. And here, this is why we had Operation Rising Lion and the 12-day war against Iran. Trump endorsed this. He worked hand in hand with Israel in a way no American president has ever done before. He thanked the IDF and Bibi Netanyahu and God in his speech on the night of Midnight Hammer. So this will be something that will be remembered for a long time. And I would just connect it to the border in this way, Hugh. Both the strike on the Iranian nuclear program and shutting down the southern border are things that the experts have said could not be done. They could
Oh, you're
not be
right.
done. We have to go by other means. We have to either have an amnesty plan or we have to use diplomacy. Trump showed that they can be done. All it takes is confidence and willpower.
Let me go to the end point of that. It can be done. You guys talked about this either today or yesterday on the commentary podcast, which is defunding NPR and PBS. It is punching way above its weight. It's only $1 billion, but it's a symbolic $1 billion in the way I think you said it. Moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was a symbolic thing that people were supposed to do for a long time. Republicans have been trying to put the stake through the heart of NPR and PBS for decades. I used to work for PBS, and I was trying to kill myself then, but not really because it wasn't bad. It wasn't. Well, I worked from '92 to 2002. It wasn't this crazy. Now it's absolutely crazy. What is the significance of that small but very noticeable? My goodness, the crying from the left is extraordinary.
Oh, it's amazing. I think it is significant. It's another item in the list of promises that past Republican leaders have made that only Donald Trump has kept. And so you mentioned the move to the moving the embassy in the first term. Now we've defunded NPR and PBS for the next 2 years. Think about the Department of Education. Ronald Reagan promised to close the Department of Education in the 1980, the original MAGA campaign. The Republican revolutionaries in 1994 wanted to close the Department of Education. It hasn't been done. What Trump is doing is essentially cutting it in half, radically reducing it through his executive power, will have the same effect as just statutorily wiping it out, I believe. And so here's another example of Trump being able to achieve something that past Republicans have not been able to accomplish. The question is why? And I think it's a combination of factors. The first thing is President Trump's incredible authority over the Republican Party and Republicans in Congress in particular. And the second thing, Hugh, and this can't be overlooked, is that Joe Biden's presidency showed conservatives and Republicans what the alternative is, what the left wants to achieve. And after the pandemic, after the school closures, after the social distancing and the masking, after the summer of George Floyd, the DEI craziness, the gender hysteria, Republicans and conservatives are much more cohesive and they understand that they have to accomplish these things now because if the left gets power again, we'll just be right back at square one.
So, Matt, the Democrats have not been sitting by idly. They've been screaming, usually with profanity, obscenity, and vulgarity, practiced. Not natural, not someone who normally works in profanity. They're just putting it everywhere because they got to be authentic. But they've also nominated Comrade Mamdani to be the face of the party. Are they nuts? Do you think they're going to really put their arms around him?
I think a lot of them are nuts. Is the truth. Look, the flip side of Trump's accomplishments over these past 6 months is that the Democrats have continued to sink. When you look at some of these ratings, Hugh, the Democrats are the most unpopular that they have been in decades. Their fundraising is not what it should be under a president that so many Democrats oppose. The recruitment's not quite there. The primary electorate is nominating figures like Mamdani, and when you hear Democratic congressmen describe their town halls, these Democratic congressmen say that the Constituents at the town halls are urging the Democratic congressman to embrace violence to resist Trump. You have the lawlessness in the streets of Los Angeles and elsewhere in defiance of federal law and the federal police power to police our borders and our immigration system. And you have this picture of a party that is in self-destruct mode. And the question is, how will they be able to change that? There's no leader on the scene, it seems to me, who's going to be able to bring some common sense to the Democratic Party. I was watching Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, visit South Carolina this past week. And I have to say, he's not a very inspiring figure. I think he kind of knows what message he needs to deliver, but he's not someone who's going to get people up on the hustings for him, especially the type of radicalized base the Democrats have now. This spells big trouble ahead of the election next year, where, as Harry Enton of CNN points out, the Democrats are not where they were in terms of the generic ballot at this point in Trump's first term. They're lagging behind because as people might have qualms with certain aspects of the Trump presidency, but they fear and loathe the Democratic alternative even more.
Parties can and do go the way of the Whigs. They can disappear. And I don't know that, I'm not saying the Democrats are going to disappear, but they're working at it. I mean, they really are working at becoming a permanent minority by going so far to the left. I'm going to talk with Matt Continetti during the break about Jeffrey Epstein. So you're going to have to listen to the podcast and the YouTube video in order to find out what he thinks about this idiocy. But I'll also let you know on the other side what he said. Don't go anywhere. I'm back with Matt Continetti now. Matt, earlier on the program, John Ellis was on with me, who does news items, really the indispensable newsletter. And he pointed out to me a story today about the suspicious activity reports involving Jeffrey Epstein. He thinks the Wall Street Journal story is idiocy, as do I, and you guys just completely decimated it. That's not the appropriate. You took more than a tenth of it apart on the podcast this morning. So I agree with your assessment. But the suspicious activities report, everyone's always wondering, where did Epstein make his money? Turns out it looks like he was money laundering. Did you read that story yet?
Yeah, that was an interesting story, and I came across it under news items as well. There's so much we don't know about how Jeffrey Epstein made his money. He clearly was some sort of con man. He was definitely bilking the rich men that he befriended and lived a life of this high-flying socialite while committing these terrible crimes of sex trafficking. That's why so many people felt disappointed when the DOJ came out and said, look, we reviewed the material and there really is nothing there in terms of, did he have a quote unquote client list? Was he blackmailing people? Was he murdered? Was he working for a foreign intelligence service? The message that came so quickly and so bluntly, I think, that the people who had invested so much in finding out the answers about Jeffrey Epstein became disappointed. And it created a political problem for Donald Trump that I think, Hugh, he's only beginning to turn around right now.
Now, let's close on that. I don't think it's a political problem, Matt, because it's so absurd. But why do you think it's a political problem? We got 1 minute.
Yeah, only because it set the White House messaging apparatus in a different direction. In Washington, you're either on offense or defense, and you never want to be on defense. And President Trump thought that he was going to be on offense at least for the next few weeks, coming off all the remarkable victories we've been discussing. But because the story developed the way it did, with the infighting within the administration, then the Democrats seizing it, then people who are part of the large MAGA coalition also raising questions, that put the White House on the defensive. And it's only just in the past 24 hours, Hugh, with this Wall Street Journal story, that President Trump is back on the offensive, which is where he needs to be, and of course, where he likes to be.
Matt Continetti, as always, thank you for joining me on a Friday. That's a wonderful recovery of the presidency's worst moment thus far and a summary. Thank you, Matt.